Fellow at the Center for a New American Security here in Washington, as well as an instructor in Georgetown University's Security Studies program. Though young in years, he's already had 2 full careers, one in politics and one in policy. He served in the State Department during the Clinton administration, as foreign policy advisor to former Senator and presidential candidate John Edwards, and he assisted 2 former Secretaries of State, James Baker and Warren Christopher, in writing their memoirs. Derek is the author or editor of 4 books, including the definitive account of the negotiation of the Dayton Accords that brokered peace in Bosnia. He's the author, with James Goldgeier, of this new book, America Between the Wars, from 11/9 to 9/11. Derek, let's look at current politics through this 11/9, 9/11 lens. Through which prism do you think our candidates are looking at politics and foreign policy, and through which prism do you think most Americans tend to look at the world?
Well, I think in many ways the 9/11 frame, so in other words, the war on terror still is what most people think of as the prism through which they look at foreign policy. And part of what we're trying to do in this book is show that that's maybe not the most accurate frame from which they should do so. That to understand that the challenges we're facing and the debates we've been having are actually ones that started with the end of the Cold War almost 20 years ago. What you're finding, though, is both candidates are in many ways still struggling with the same debates that we were having during the 1990s.
Give me an example.
Take, say, Barack Obama, for example. I mean, Bill Clinton and the Democratic Party, liberals, tried to find a new consensus about America's role in the world after the end of the Cold War. And that was rooted in 3 basic things: promoting democracy around the world, something that has been identified with George W. Bush, but it was actually something that Clinton championed in 1992 in his first campaign for president. A sort of open approach to globalization, and a belief that globalization was a fact of life and something that America should embrace, and that we should seek policies, for example, trade agreements, to help prepare our country better for the global economy. And third, on the use of force, and the idea that American military power needed to be used to help solve problems in the world. And we saw that in the 1990s repeatedly, where we averaged an intervention every 18 months, a military intervention every 18 months in places like Bosnia and Haiti and Kosovo and Iraq. We're seeing on the Democratic side that those sort of 3 pillars of the Clinton consensus, democracy promotion, globalization, and the use of force, are being challenged today in the Democratic Party. Barack Obama has articulated policies that are squarely in that sort of consensus approach. But you've seen that he's had some struggles in how his Democratic partners and supporters are how much they're behind him. Similarly, on the McCain side, with the end of the Cold War, you saw conservatives splinter into factions. I mean, communism and anti-communism had been the kind of glue that had held modern conservatism together. When the Soviet Union went away, conservatives broke apart. You had sort of George H.W. Bush, classic realist conservatives. You had Pat Buchanan lead a sort of more nationalist, nativist, neo-isolationist charge. You had the neoconservatives, a group that has become somehow notorious in the last 7 years, disappear almost. And then you had conservatives on Capitol Hill, the kind of Contract for America conservatives that were led by Newt Gingrich in the 1990s, who had a kind of more nationalist, hawkish view of the world, suspicious of international institutions. And conservatism had kind of lost its cohesiveness during the 90s. 9/11 and the years after 9/11 created a sort of sense that conservatives were more unified on foreign policy and America's role in the world. We argue in this book that that was more of an illusion, and that what we're actually seeing now is conservatives breaking apart. You're seeing that in the campaign of John McCain, where people puzzle over the fact that he's being advised both by neoconservatives and classic conservatives. And our argument in the book, reflecting on this history, is that these fights on the conservative side will play out in the McCain campaign, as we're seeing, and they will play out in a McCain presidency if he were to win. Or if he were to lose, there'll be a tremendous debate in the Republican Party about what a conservative foreign policy is all about. And these debates are ones that began in these years that we write about in the book.
One of the points you make, which I found fascinating, was how the far left of the American political spectrum and the far right of the American political spectrum come together on issues of intervention and isolation.
Absolutely.
Do you see America itself becoming more internationalist or more isolationist in the decade ahead?
Just to your first point, it was striking to us as we set out to interview as many people as we could in writing this book who were involved in the debates these years. We interviewed Pat Buchanan on the far right and Ralph Nader on the far left, and talking with them about their partnership in say, opposing the trade deals that the Clinton administration was pushing in the 1990s. It was striking how they may get there in different ways, but they come to agreement on some of these issues. But to the larger question of where America is heading, I actually see America heading in a more internationalist direction. I mean, I think it's significant that in this campaign so far, we have seen both major party candidates, John McCain and Barack Obama, travel overseas during the campaign, and that's something is unprecedented in American politics for presidential candidates to actually take time away from the campaign trail and go to Europe and the Middle East. And clearly we're at war, and it's important for our candidates to see the troops. I also think, though, it's a reflection that not just foreign policy elites, but the political class and common citizens understand that the next president, one of the most important jobs that he is going to have, is to work well with the rest of the world. And I think the fact that our candidates are traveling shows that.
There's a poignant passage in this book about Iraq. I mean, many poignant passages, but one about Iraq in which you say that we're about to have the fourth handover of the Iraq problem, from George Bush the Elder to Bill Clinton, from Bill Clinton to Bush the Younger, and now Bush the Younger to a new president.
That's right.
How did it happen that Iraq became the post-Cold War preoccupation for America? And just in general, how do you think that preoccupation is going to come to an end?
Yeah, well, it's a very good point, and I think one of the lessons that we learned in writing the book, and we hope to convey to readers, is just to show how troubling Iraq has been for American foreign policy really since the end of the Cold War. I mean, of course, Saddam's invasion of Kuwait in August of 1990 was just 9 months after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And that our entanglement with Iraq is not just a story of 2002 and 2003 to the present. It's not a post-9/11 story. It's not just a George W. Bush story. This is a story of almost 20 years that America has been entangled with this country in the Middle East. And we talk about this third Iraq handoff, and that in each presidency since the end of the Cold War, from George H.W. Bush to Clinton, and Clinton to George W. Bush, and George W. Bush to his successor, has handed off a struggle with a country that has proved very troubling for the United States. Our hope is that by trying to sort of reflect on this history and inform people better, that there'll be greater knowledge that the next president, whether again it's President McCain or President Obama, prevents the fourth Iraq handoff. And that
the reason I ask is because this show is well watched in
right,
Iraq.
Absolutely.
What do you think Iraqis want to see from the next president if he wants to be the last person to deal with this issue?
Yeah, I mean, and I think the important word is deal, because I think there's a sense that Iraq is just is a recurring problem for the United States, and I think what every American wants is for Iraq not to be a problem, but to be a partner, to be a country that we can work with, and is not something that is a source of tension or bloodshed, and that's what it's been for the United States and for the Iraqi people since August of 1990. And our hope is that with the next president, again, whether it's McCain or Obama, we're on a footing that what we're handing off is not a problem, but a great potential in partnership and hope and opportunity for our two countries.
Derek Chollet, thank you very much
for
joining us
for having me.
on Dakhel, Washington.